We're going to get started in just a moment. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our environmental health chat. My name is Rochelle Chapman. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator for Cures. We are so glad to have you with us today. Cures, that's our acronym for the Center for Urban Responses to Environmental Stressors. We are housed in the institution or the Institute of Environmental Health in the Department of Research. And so we always have a whole bunch of acronyms, but we want to let you know what that is. So IEHS and then CURES, but we're also a P30 Center for NIEHS, which is the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. And so thank you for joining us today. We are so happy that you are here. This is our second environmental health chat. We had one last month, and normally we don't have them so close together, but we wanted to make sure that we could get out and reach to the community and to get you the information that you need. And today's environmental health chat is on coping with stress. And so we have two very great speakers that will be introduced to you very shortly, and they could tell you just a little bit more about coping and dealing with stress. So before we get started, just a little bit about Cures is that we have a strong commitment to serving the community, to informing and fostering bi-directional communications between research and the public. So my job is to take the information that our researchers and doctors and our experts have taken out time and studied and researched and peer reviewed and all of that stuff. And then we disseminate the information to the community, things as water safety, water contamination, air quality, lead, asthma and allergies, cleaning and disinfecting, all of that good stuff that can help us to have healthier lives and even preserve our lives. And so we're honored to have you today here at our environmental health chat. And so without further ado, I'm going to get out of the way and I am going to introduce our moderator for today, Dr. James Blessman. He is, everybody knows Dr. Blessman. When I was brought on and onboarded to Cures, everybody told me I had to meet Dr. Blessman. He has several different roles in terms of not just a professor, not just a medical doctor. He's on board here with us at Cures, but he's everywhere working in the jail systems and so much more. And so without further ado, I'll be back later on to talk to you about the importance of our evaluations. And we have a raffle, so stick with us because we're raffling off an Amazon Fire tablet at the end of this event. Without further ado, Dr. James Blessman.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And for the kind words as well. So as mentioned, I'm one of the other faculty members within the department with Cures. A little bit about me. My training is both internal medicine and occupational medicine, where my goal is not just the absence of disease, but a fulfilled life, which is a little bit on why I always wear this hat. Whenever you see me, you'll see me in this hat where it says the D gets an A, which I'm very interested in building better citizens. I have a tool I call the Citizen Report Card, and that's really my goal. If you want to know more about that, you can always reach out to me about that. Before we get started, I'm just going to ask everybody to take one mindful breath. But before we do that, I want to describe for you what that's going to look like. What you're going to do is you're going to close your eyes and you're going to breathe. You're going to take a deep breath in to a count of about 7. And I want you to become aware of the air going into your nose, down into your lungs, and then back out. And as you do that, I want you to notice if the air going in is cooler than the air coming out at your nose. So we're going to do this right now. One mindful breath at the count of 7. Ready? And inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. Thank you very much for doing that. what you've just done is you become very present when you become aware of your breath. And I will tell you that the more you do that, if you were to do that throughout the day, and the more you do it, it will actually transform your life because you will be spending more time in the present moment. And the present moment is a place where fear and frustration cannot exist. Because in order to have fear, you have to have future. In order to have frustration, you have to have past. And so coming to the present moment kind of makes it difficult for those things to exist. And also, when you slow your breath down, you're actually giving your body permission to heal itself. So it's a very important tool to master for yourself. Now, today's topic is really about stress, which is really important. And especially in this season, because the decisions that you make are not only critical for yourself, but for those around you. And the challenge is that, knowledge of the right road doesn't necessarily ensure that the right road will be taken. And oftentimes when we make poor decisions, it's because we're either fatigued, fearful, or frustrated, and hence the exercise that we started with. And while we're talking about stress, I want to state that the target is really one of mental fitness, because everything that you do will start as a thought in your mind. And you want to get to the place where your mind is really your ally and not your enemy. And I'll point you to a TED Talk that's on YouTube by an Aaliyah Crum that is, we'll try and put maybe the link on the website, but it talks about your mindset. And what was interesting is she looked at a bunch of housekeepers and asked them whether or not they exercise, they got much exercise. And the majority of them said that they did not exercise, even though they were doing housekeeping tasks all day. So they broke them up into two groups. And in one group, they educated them to say, what you're doing really counts as exercise and it really benefits you. And then they followed them up several weeks later. And the people where they changed their mindset about, looking at their job as actual exercise benefited. Their weights went down, their blood pressures went down, and their job satisfaction actually went up without doing more work. All it was a change in their perception. And so when it comes to this issue of stress, think of it as try and get to a place where you realize that working through the challenges actually make you stronger. And I would say pay attention to your emotions in that piece too, because how your emotions are will kind of temper the outcome. So imagine if somebody is rushing and they bump into you, if you're in a state of kind of love and forgiveness, your response is going to be a lot different than if you're already frustrated. So with that as a frustration, I'm really glad to bring to you two speakers today to talk a little bit more about stress. And hopefully, and I'm sure you're going to find this information very helpful to you, particularly in this COVID season. So the first up is going to be Dr. Trentacosta, who is a clinical psychologist at the university. He does research on families, particularly those with young children. And my kids are a little older now, and I'm grateful for that. Yeah. Um, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about the types of stress, who might be at risk, kind of some special groups, and a little bit about some coping mechanisms for dealing with stress itself. So if you would welcome Dr. Chris Trentacosta.
Thank you, Dr. Blessman. Yeah, you covered the three topics so well, so I'll just jump in. And I'm going to first start about giving an overview of 3 types of stress. And so this information I shared at a United Way town hall a few weeks ago, and it's also in our social stressors fact sheet, which you can access on our Cures website. So yeah, they're posting the links right now, so you can find that information. So I'll give the summary now. The 3 types of stress. So one general thing to keep in mind is that stress is not all a bad thing. Now that's hard to imagine during this time. And I do think, post COVID-19, we all deserve, I can safely say that we all deserve a multi-week vacation to our favorite tropical island or vacation spot where we have no stress. That would be nice. But normally in the day-to-day, some stress can be good, and that's called positive stress or eustress. And so you think about that when you're learning something new, and it can be stressful at first, but then when you learn that thing, it's a good thing, right? So we do need some stress in our lives to move us forward. That's one type. The second type of stress is tolerable stress. And so tolerable stress is, still seen as a negative thing, but it's typically contained, it lasts a certain amount of time, and importantly, you have some support around it. So it becomes tolerable. Even if it's the loss of a loved one, you still have other people around you who care about you and can support you through it. So that stressor, while a difficult time, is tolerable. The third type of stress is the one we're most concerned about, and that's been called toxic stress. And toxic stress is typically chronic. It's uncontrollable, meaning you just don't have, control or things you can do about the situation. And oftentimes it also becomes toxic because you don't have any support around it or enough support around it. And that's really where we become concerned during this time of COVID-19, because it's obviously been chronic. Here we are at 8+ months. It's largely, although there are certainly things we can do in terms of social distancing and wearing masks, but in the broader sense, it certainly can feel uncontrollable. And getting the support we need can be a real challenge too. So that's what we're really focusing here, is on this fact that we're all kind of as a society and really globally going through this toxic stressor together. And that's why the next topic I want to talk about is sort of who seems to be suffering the most right now. And I'm going to give this sort of a preview. It might surprise you when we think about who's suffering from a mental health perspective. So I'm going to talk about who might be experiencing the most sort of toxic effects, maybe we'll call it, mainly through the lens of who's reporting the most symptoms of anxiety, so worries and fears, and depression, feeling really down and having lost interest in things. And the reason I say this may surprise you is because to some extent, the people who are suffering the most from a emotional stress perspective are not the same people who are suffering the most from a risk of serious physical effects and even death from COVID. So some of the people, it lines up with what you'd expect. Certainly our essential workers, our healthcare workers, a population that Dr. Blessman works with that are having huge outbreaks right now, the prison system. Those are areas where there's a huge amount of stress. And that's important to recognize and do all we can to support. There are other groups, we're talking about parents. I do have young kids, so parents are experiencing heightened rates of stress right now. Obviously managing schooling and their own kids' stress. But what I want to refer to is some of the data that we have coming in through the CDC. So the CDC has been doing a survey now for the last several months of the US and looking at symptoms of anxiety and depression and who's kind of experiencing the most. Now, first off, I'll say, as a society, I was just reviewing this morning. I mean, we truly are in a sort of mental health pandemic, if you want to think of it that way, because the rate right now, just nationally, based on this survey, these are not diagnoses, but based on the questions they're asking of thousands of people across the country, it's 41.4% of the US population are responding to these surveys suggesting that they have serious symptoms of anxiety or depression at this point from the most recent wave. And that's actually ticking up over time in recent months, which does coincide with COVID going up. So that 41.4% is multiple times higher than comparable data from 2019. So right now we're in a difficult situation in terms of stress and mental health. Now, in terms of, I said, what may surprise you is some of the demographic distinctions they're able to draw in the data set maybe aren't so surprising or inconsistent with what we might know or expect. Racial and ethnic minority groups are comparably higher rates. So Hispanic and Black Americans are reporting higher rates of anxiety and depression symptoms right now, which is, consistent with also the experience of COVID. So some of it is consistent with what you'd expect. Other things are very maybe inconsistent with what you'd expect. For example, North and South Dakota right now, they have very high rates of COVID. They actually have some of the lowest rates, though still elevated compared to 2019, in terms of symptoms of anxiety and depression. Michigan actually has one of the lower rates right now compared to other states, while we have some of the highest rates of COVID right now. So it doesn't always map onto COVID. And the experience and the physical risks associated with COVID. And one of the key areas it doesn't is in age. And this is the one I said that might really surprise you. They look from 18 to 80 plus. The 18 to 29-year-olds have the highest rates right now of serious anxiety, depression symptoms. It's approaching 60%. Whereas 80 plus year olds are actually only about a third of that rate. They're at about 18% right now. And so these findings are really striking because, of course, the older adults are the ones who are most vulnerable physically, and the younger adults are, comparatively speaking, less vulnerable physically. And I think a lot of it has to do with all the learning challenges in high school and colleges and being away from friends and how much that matters for our younger adults. But for the older adults, this is actually consistent with what we know. I was just reviewing research by Laura Carstensen, Dr. Laura Carstensen out of Stanford University. She studied older adults for her whole career, as far as I know. And she recently published research showing that even during COVID, older adults tend to maintain their positive emotions and have fewer negative emotions than younger adults. And this is really fascinating, important research, because what it's suggesting is even during COVID, a lot of people thought before COVID that it might be that older adults do better psychologically and emotionally because they're able to avoid stressors. They're not working. Work is a stressor. They don't have little kids at home, right? It's often seen as easier to be a grandparent than to be the parent. But what this COVID research of Dr. Carstensen is showing is that it's not the avoidance of stressors, because they still have that COVID stressor. What she's suggesting is it tends to be how they look at the world, which I think, Dr. Blessman, your points were so great in that regard, because they're older adults, other research shows before COVID, tend to focus on the positive. They tend to just, it's not even a conscious thing necessarily, but their mind tends to go to positive things. Positive memories, positive experiences, positive emotions. And that can just be so, so important. Taking that information and having that in your mind, I'll transition to the last topic in my comments here, which is about coping. So how do we cope? Whether you're a younger adult or an older adult, how do we cope during this time of COVID? And there are really two main types of coping that the research literature supports. One is called problem-focused coping. And this is when you get at the root of the problem, when you actually try to change the situation or the stressor you're facing so that you're not facing it anymore, or at least facing it less. Emotion-focused coping is changing your reactions to the stressor. Changing your emotional reactions, maybe because you can't change the problem itself. Here's the interesting thing. Problem-focused coping is usually seen as the better thing to do. But during this era of COVID, we can't magically wave our wand and get rid of COVID, right? So we can do things like wear masks and distance from people and be safe. And that is sort of a form of problem-focused coping. If I avoid going out to the restaurant or the bar, that's kind of a problem-focused coping approach because I avoid getting exposure to COVID there. And we can also do things like advocacy, which we have a training coming up in a couple weeks to put in a plug on that. That's a form of problem-focused coping that even during COVID we can do because we're trying to make a change to the situation. But for the most part during COVID, we are left with emotion-focused coping. And I'm so glad that Dr. Blessman gave some examples of healthy forms of emotion-focused coping, because one of the risks of emotion-focused coping is that there can be too much of it. You can do the wrong kinds of emotion-focused coping. So for example, eating too much, because eating is a form of emotion-focused coping, or at least it can be, beyond keeping us alive and giving us the calories we need. We might eat to cope because it makes us feel good, right? So it's that emotion-focused coping, making us feel okay. And obviously some of that's okay. We're all, probably doing forms of that these days, but it can get to be too much. Another example of emotion-focused coping gone awry is drinking or certainly drugs, right? We can do drinking or drugs to numb our feelings. That's emotion-focused coping. But unfortunately, too much of that or over a sustained period of time, that hurts our bodies. So it's really about this balance of problem-focused and emotion-focused coping and doing the right forms, the most healthy forms of emotion-focused coping. Things like those mindful breaths, things like, exercise, journaling is another great example. And also talking to people, sharing our feelings with loved ones who we trust, or a therapist or a mental health professional if that is something you wanted to pursue as well. Those are all ways in which emotion-focused coping during this time of COVID can be really adaptive. So those are my comments. I'm certainly open to hearing questions or comments.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that, Dr. Trentacosta. So I did want to go back and to echo a point that you made about journaling. It was interesting. I saw an article that looked at the relationship between the amount of inflammation that you have in your body and socioeconomic status. So as the socioeconomic status went up, the inflammation had a tendency to go down, and vice versa. And some of the thinking behind that was, as your socioeconomic status goes up, you have more options and there's less stress and so on and so forth. What was interesting was the people who had what they would call dispositional gratitude, so where they had a tendency to look at things in a positive sense, as you mentioned, that relationship was lost, meaning that the individuals who were in lower socioeconomic status didn't necessarily have higher amounts of inflammation in their body. So being able to look at things in a positive light, to look at things as a challenge and approach them that way, does seem to be helpful physiologically in your body. So this thing of writing down one or two things that you're grateful for at the end of the day can be very beneficial to you. And one thing I said is no one ever hurt their eyes by looking on the bright side. So I think that that's a very important takeaway from that. So I appreciate those comments. I don't know, did we have any comments and the questions in the chat at all? Rochelle, do you know? I haven't been watching. I don't think
So we just
so.
had one comment from Christine in the chat that talked about there being other stressors like racial tensions, inequities, the fire in California, and the very contentious election.
Yeah. I'm glad Christine brought that up, because that was one thing I was going to say in response to Dr. Blessman, your comments, because I think those are super helpful. I'm a psychologist. We focus on what can help the individual, but we do have to keep in mind the broader context. And so I think what we're suggesting here, journaling, mindfulness, those are good things for you to do as an individual, but we also need to understand that at a societal level, there are things we need to do as a society structurally when we talk about structural racism or systemic racism and other sort of major issues going on right now, some related to the pandemic, some bigger overall. Those are things we need to address as a society to make everyone have more opportunity and have, less of this toxic stress. So we really need to pair both of those things you can do as a person for yourself with things that we as a society, should be doing to make things better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, well, we're gonna move along here. We're gonna go next to Andrea Rogers, who is a clinical psychologist, also, and has several roles. She describes herself as a wife, and a mom, a servant, a life coach, and a publisher, and has some very interesting books, Silencing Your Inner Critic and Releasing the Burden of Shame, which I think are, I'm actually excited to know that. I may have to have a look at those things because I think that it can do a lot for healing in our community to pay attention to those two things in particular. So she's going to talk to us today about coping with stress as well. So without further ado, why don't we bring up Andrea Rogers?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much, Dr. Blessman. During his first 5 minutes of speaking, I was like, clearly he can talk about this subject, and us having that mindful moment really set the foundation for this talk. And it was just refreshing to hear that from a medical doctor as well. So I got really excited. So thank you to Dr. Blessman. I also want to thank Rochelle Chapman from Cures and the co-facilitator, Dr. Trentacosta, who did an awesome job. I may echo some of the things that Dr. Trentacosta had spoke about, but we're just going to really talk about stress. We're going to normalize it. We're going to talk about it. First, everyone has stress, no matter who you are. It is not a thing that discriminates against people. Now, we all have different levels of stress, but everyone has it. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, we were talking about the first wave and the second wave, but we were really also expecting mental health concerns to really reach an all-time high. And we were like kind of waiting, like, when is it going to happen? And we're watching. And what I'm seeing right now is just that increase, not just from the pandemic, as was also discussed. There's still everyday life. So it's not like the pandemic happened and life stopped. Systemic issues didn't stop. Even more so, those things came to the surface. So first, everyone has stress. Also, all stress isn't bad. That reaction when your heart beat fast and somebody try to cut you off on the road and you hurry up and move over, that's a stress reaction that actually has a positive effect because it can keep you from hurt, harm, and danger. The thing where stress becomes an issue is long-term stress can really harm your health, whether it's a physical issue, a mental issue, or an emotional issue. So we are accustomed to have stress reactions, but kind of this long-term stress where, we're worried consistently, day after day, week after week. Our bodies are literally having a reaction to that stress. So it's not just your imagination where it seems like you have a little bit less patience with, your spouse or your coworkers. It's not a coincidence that you may have one of two reactions. You may be snacking more and eating a little bit more, or you may have a complete loss of appetite. You feel like you are extremely tired, and no matter how much sleep you get, you're like, wait a minute, I'm not getting enough rest. I consistently feel tired. And then there's others who aren't able to sleep at all. So with all of this information, where does that leave us? It leaves us knowing that stress is a natural reaction and it can be managed. The kind of foundation point to understand is that you don't have to do anything to get stressed, right? You could turn on the TV and be stressed. You could scroll through Facebook. You could be stressed. You can just take a phone call or a text message and you can have a stressful reaction. To manage stress, it takes a high level of intentionality. I'm just thinking about that mindful moment that we had this morning. We had to pause, we had to stop, we had to become aware of the present moment. And those are the intentional things. It doesn't mean it has to be this big, huge action. However, we do have to be intentional in managing our stress. So, what are some healthy and optimal ways? Before I talk about the optimal ways, one of the unique conditions of the pandemic is that a lot of things that we would normally do to cope with stress, we aren't necessarily able to do. So we get together with our loved ones, we go on vacation, we go on a trip, or we go out to the mall. Some of those things we are no longer able to do. So, what is it that we can do in this time and in this hour? One of the cheapest and best ways to manage stress is through connection. Connection is not necessarily face to face, but be intentional about maintaining those relationships that are healthy to you in this season and in this hour. Those relationships that kind of feed you, we use the terms feed your soul. Feeding your soul is so important because there's so many things that are grabbing our attention. There are so many things that we're pulled in directions. There are parents who are trying to figure out homeschooling. There are adult children who have become caregivers to their parents and trying to manage that as well as working remote. So our minds are being pulled in so many different directions. We really have to be intentional about a word called rest. Rest is very important, and rest just isn't sleep. Our minds are going so fast. I don't know if you're like me, when you wake up, you're already thinking about your list that you have to do. I have to make sure I take a pause before I jump into my workday, that I take a pause, I take a breath, and make sure that I am focused and ready for whatever's going to come that day. Not just rest from a physical standpoint, but because our brains are moving so much, we know this, but taking a literal rest from social media, taking a rest from the news, disconnecting the TV and all of the social media sites, we really have to be intentional about disconnecting, because that gives us the feeling of connection on social media, but it's a false connection. What we're really craving is we're craving that connection to people. So whereas we used to text, this is the time to really pick up the phone and call someone and check on them. And that's that connection to someone else. But it's also equally important that you have a connection to yourself. You're giving, you're pouring out, you're doing so much, you're working, you're figuring this out. We need some time where it's not isolated time by ourselves, but actually where we're focusing on ourselves. So when Dr. Trentacosta talked about the journaling, when Dr. Blessman talked about the mindful moments, taking some time, what is it that you enjoy to do for you? Reading is a great stress reliever because it actually allows our brains to take a rest and we focus on something totally different. In addition to the reading, one thing that is very, very important is physical health. And stress reduction is very related to our physical health. Eating healthy and well-balanced meals. I don't know how many of you have new recipes for banana bread. Banana bread is like the hottest thing going during the pandemic. We've got all these new recipes and we're trying all of this new stuff. But try our best to eat healthy because we're feeding ourselves. Having some form of physical exercise is very important. And yes, we're in the house. We can still go for walks. We can have that opportunity to do some videos, making time to unwind and making sure that you are, one, connected to others, but also connecting to yourself. So how do you know when your coping mechanisms or your stress is literally out of hand? Because in managing stress, you may not be able to do it just alone, by yourself. We may need some assistance. We may need professional assistance if our high blood pressure is getting out of hand. We may need some mental health intervention. This is the time to not try to go it alone and do it alone. Stress can be managed, but it does not have to be managed alone by yourself. So that may mean reaching out to your local community health provider, talking to your primary care physician about how you are feeling. If you know that you just haven't been feeling yourself, there's so many people that aren't feeling themselves right now. Stress, while it is normal, it is not something that we have to remain in that state, because again, it affects your long-term health. So reaching out to get that assistance when needed. Trying to stay connected to the community, or if you're in a faith-based organization, that is going to be really important right now, to make sure that we are reducing self. Above anything else, there's this word called balance and self-care out there, which is very important. But we want to define what balance and self-care means for us so that we can truly reduce stress in this time. Being kind to yourself. When we look at the whole year of 2020, 2020 has been a very interesting year, not just with the pandemic, but with so many things that are going on individually as well as collectively. As a society, we kind of need a collective mindful moment as a country, as a society. The stress and tension, sometimes you can feel it in the air. And so we have to make those intentional decisions to really, really de-stress, take a step back, talking to our healthcare or mental health professional to see what it is that we can do. Some of us, if we ask, like, what do you do for fun? Or what do you do to relax? We're so busy going, we don't even know what we do for fun or know what we do to relax anymore. These things are so important. And relaxing doesn't just mean, taking a nap. They are the breathing exercises, setting time on your calendar to be healthy, to set goals and priorities. That time management skill is going to be so important to manage stress, because right now, there are so many people who are the parent, the teacher, the remote caregiver. There's so many functions and roles that we're having. It's going to be very important to really have some time management, to be able, and the holidays are coming. We are planning differently for the holidays. What does that look like, that you can celebrate the holidays and still be healthy and not totally stress out about it, that you can actually enjoy the holidays and it's not a stressful opportunity for you? So again, just want to remind everybody, stress is normal. Everybody definitely has stress. So that's the first thing. But also remember it, not all stress is bad. There's a certain level of stress, like Dr. Trentacosta said, with positive stress. But long-term stress can harm your health. We are not meant to function in that hypervigilant state on a constant basis. It affects our heart and it affects our mind. And being able to come back into that present moment, stress reduction as a strategy is so important. And in some communities, stress and trauma is so normalized that we think this is how we are supposed to function. This is not how we're supposed to function on a consistent basis. Knowing what it means to take care of you, and when you feel like you can't, or that stress isn't managed, reach out to get some assistance. I'm going to put some links in the chat. I see some links as well for the Wayne State Health Clinics, which is such a great opportunity. I work at the Children's Center, so we work with children who are 0 to 21 and provide services. There are crisis lines, which I'm also going to put in the chat. You can call the crisis line. There's a text crisis line where you can get immediate assistance. You do not have to figure this out and manage this alone. There is help that is available. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Blessman.
Awesome, awesome words and comments. I so yeah, I identify with all of that. I guess if I could echo one thing about the normalization of stress, you know, as you mentioned, it is there, that whole stress response is there to protect us, where you are to focus on the thing that is a threat for you. And so what it does is it causes you to focus in one area, but it's shutting down a lot of other unnecessary things. But when it becomes chronic, all those things that have been shut down actually become necessary. And that's kind of part of the problem, is that you can't get to normal function because of this particular stress state. And one thing about slowing your breath down, it becomes a way of turning off your sympathetic nervous system and turning on your parasympathetic nervous system just by slowing down your breath. And that's what I meant by it actually gives your body permission to heal itself when you pull yourself out of that stress space. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning is, particularly in this season, is the importance of purpose, and being clear about your why. And the reason for that is, um, with every word that you hear, with every image that you see, there is a metabolic cost to you for that. You actually have to expend energy to assess that thing and determine whether or not it is stressful for you or what you're going to deal with it. When you don't have clarity about the things that you should be focused on, you will begin to spend time on things that don't really matter for you. And that's what you really don't want to do, particularly in this season, because you want to kind of conserve your energy, if you will, for those things that truly matter. It's almost like if I told you that you could only charge your cell phone once a week, there are probably some calls, when that phone rings, you would say, you'd look at that and you go, no, that's all right. I'm not, I'm not going to take that call at this moment, because you don't want to necessarily expend that particular, you don't want to use your battery. Some things are not worth your battery life. Well, your brain is kind of the same way, and so really be clear about those things that are important to you. And I think the word was, being intentional about the things that you need to be focused on. And I think that's so important. I guess, oh my gosh, from you two, I learned so many things today. I mean, I just, very good, very good. I hope people enjoyed it as much as I did, from both of our presenters, and I hope you found something that was very helpful for you. I don't know if any of you have any final comments that you wanted to state also. I think we have a little time for that. Because if not, then I will turn it back over to Rochelle.
This was excellent. I was just trying to wait to see if anyone had a question that you wanted to ask before we move forward. There's a lot of good things going on here in our chat. I'm going to ask Andrea if you can talk a little bit more about normalizing. We have a couple people who put that in there, and I saw that you responded in the chat, but also for our Facebook Live folks as well, if you can talk for a moment about that, and then we will. Thank you.
Sure. Just the whole concept of, individuals asking for help or admitting that they are stressed is not something that's very common. We live in a society right now where we reward busyness. If you're busy, that means you're doing something, you're accomplishing something, and it's off to the next goal and it's off to the next task. And so we kind of are uncomfortable with admitting that we are actually stressed. And so the more conversations that we have, that we say, you know what, everybody deals with stress. I was talking to someone who is in the process of moving. They're figuring out how to homeschool their child and, figure out remote. And they was like, why can't I just get it together right now? I said, because you stressed and we living in a whole pandemic right now. You are not functioning at your best self. Like normalizing, like, okay, I'm gonna be a little bit more tired right now because of what's going on, and being able to properly respond to what I need and not what is a stereotypical response or what society says that we need to do. I read a meme one time that said something like, if you don't come out of the pandemic with a new book or, that new business, then time wasn't your issue. Like indicating that if you're not doing a lot, we're lazy. I'm like, people are stressed out right now. Reading that meme made me stressed. You know what I'm saying? So normalizing that we are stressed right now and making accommodations for ourselves and giving grace to ourselves to be able to kind of deal with that.
Yeah, could I add too that I think it's important for us as individuals with our friends and family, but I'm also thinking organizationally. A few weeks ago, for those of you who work for Wayne State know, Wayne State declared a mental health day, which I think was very important, showing that the whole university or the administration recognized this is a big issue right now for our students, but also for our staff. And I think the more, for those of us who are leading things or have people we're overseeing or working with, just really normalizing that in the groups we're working with.
There's, I'm noticing in the chat also, there was something about toxic people, and dealing with toxic people. And one thing that I will say, and I'll try not to go too biblical on folks, but my name's Blessman, but if you yeah, so but if you kind of go across all religions, there is some universal theme about the importance of love and forgiveness. Okay, in terms of and when I forgive somebody, that forgiveness doesn't benefit them, it actually benefits me, because it allows me to get back to my thing when I can forgive. As long as I'm in a place of unforgiveness, it's like unforgiveness is like a poison that I'm expecting the other person to get sick. It's like I drink it and I expect somebody else to get sick. It doesn't work that way. So when I'm able to walk in forgiveness, it actually benefits me. And so if the goal is the ultimate goal on some level is love and forgiveness, how do you know if you've gotten to that level if you haven't run across the unlovable or the unforgivable? I mean, how would you even know that you have that trait? So for some people, there may be some circumstances that come into your life that just is a test for you to see what is your capacity to love and what is your capacity to forgive. Just to know if you've gotten to that level. Now, I'm not saying that you got to let people walk all over you and all that kind of stuff. That's not the point. But I do think on some level, we would all be better if we raised our capacity as a society for love and forgiveness. So I'm not sure if that was the answer that folks were looking for, but that's my answer. So, but my last name is Blessman, so I'm just saying.
Thank you, Dr. Blessman. This has been an incredible environmental health chat, and we've got so many more things from that. Hopefully you've been looking at our chat. We've had some people chime in talking about meditation sites and putting some great resources in there. Thank you, Jessica, and some others that put links in there. And so again, thank you to Dr. Chris Trentacosta and to Andrea Rogers. They did a wonderful job If you guys have any contact information, maybe an email address or things that you want to put in the chat, please do that. If someone has questions or anything, there's great resources that's here, so we don't have to struggle alone. And so again, thank you so very much. We have time for a raffle. So we're asking those that our family that's on Facebook and here on Zoom, if you would begin to prepare a number between 1 and, let me make sure what I said to Carrie. I said 1 to 200, a number between 1 to 200. And while you're typing that, as soon as you get a number in from 1 to 200, we're checking both on Facebook and on Zoom. Go ahead and put that. Okay, you've already started. You guys are not playing at all. While you're doing that and while we're monitoring that, we want to remind you that Carrie posted our evaluation. We need you to please fill that out so that we can continue to disseminate information and educational information and have these type of events free of charge. It's a very short survey. Please, if you would fill that out to help us. We want to continue to do these type of things, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. I have pages of notes that's here just from these three presentations, all right? I have pages of notes. So we want to also give you an announcement. We want to give everybody time to be a part of this, and so continue to put your numbers in as you're doing that. But we want to give you an announcement as well. We have an upcoming advocacy event that we will post in the chat as well on Thursday, December the 10th, with one of our co-leaders, Nicholas Schreck. We would love for you to be a part of that. We'll put the RSVP link in there as well, talking about making a change, okay? So please, if you would register for that event, we would be glad to have you there. I want to thank our entire Cures team, definitely Dr. Blessman for being our moderator, Dr. Trentacosta again, and Andrea Rogers, as well as our project manager, Carrie Leach. We want to thank our director, Melissa Runge Morris, as well as Christine Cole Johnson, and our entire Cures team. We have some Cures members that's on here, and even some of our leadership. I saw Graham, Jessica, and a couple of other folks. Sorry if I didn't see your names, but thank you all for joining us today. So Carrie, if you have been monitoring this, do we have a winner?
We do. The individual, I put her name in the chat box. It's Igrial1, chose number 72, and I selected 71. So there is your winner of the, what is that, iPad? What is the raffle?
It's the Amazon Fire tablet. Way to go. So please make sure you send us your information so that we can get your tablet to you. Thank you everyone for joining. We had some people that were very, very close to that. Again, please fill out our evaluation. Please, please, please. Thank you so very much. I don't have anything else, Dr. Blessman or Chris or Andrea, if you have, or Carrie, any closing remarks. Otherwise, we'll let you go and say have a great day.
Just thank everyone for attending. Really appreciate your presence.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
And if you're on Facebook, go to Cures WSU and you can forward this and share this message as well. Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.
Take care, everyone.